Everyone in here is aware of the if the fire alarm goes off, just follow the green signs to the car park outside. We welcome the use of the Welsh language. I have not received any notice of members or invited attendees wish to use the Welsh language, so today it will be carried out in English only. Before I open the meeting, I'd like to introduce everyone to our new head of planning, and Alison Hughes. I'm going to ask Alison if she'd like to introduce herself, and she can tell us or tell you all a little bit about one another. I've worked with Alison before, some years ago, so Alison and myself we're aware of one another. So I'd like to ask Alison if she'd like to introduce herself. Thanks.
Good morning, I'm Alison Hughes. I'm the new Steve Bendel. Although I have been involved in licensing for a number of years, as Councillor Otis just pointed out, I took forward the introduction of the Licensing Act and the development of our policies around that, and I was in fact the person responsible for employing Steve Bendel. You may have your own views on that. I think it works quite well. But the reason I appointed him is we're very different people, so I think that we had different strengths and weaknesses, and what you may see is that we go in slightly different directions as a result of that, because we're bringing different strengths to bear on that role. I have been involved in licensing since I joined Torvine in 1997, when I was in charge of the team that dealt with taxi licensing. As I said, I have had some involvement with the Licensing Act up to about 2006, and I am also the lead officer for the animal welfare licensing that's now coming into the team with me, and I in fact sit on a number of national Welsh and UK bodies that look at that side of things and look at the animal health and welfare more generally. So that'll be, give you a flavour of where I'm coming from. I'm thankful to have two excellent officers in Claire and Simone, and they will continue in their roles, and they will continue to bring their expertise to the areas of work that they cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Well, we'll move on to today's business. The first item on the agenda is attendance and apologies.
Apologies received from Councillor Tomlinson and Councillor Marshall.
Thank you. Item agenda 2, we move on to item agenda 2, and I'll ask Tim if he has if he'd like to come in on there.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in relation to declarations of interest, I'm not aware of any members, unless any of you have any questions or issues you want to raise now. I'm not aware of any. Just to say that if any arise during the meeting, we'll obviously let me know and we'll deal with them as they arise. Thank you.
So we move on to the item agenda 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting. We start with page 1. On page 2. Just to clarify on agenda item 4.1, the sloop and PP, the abbreviations, I was lost on the abbreviations, but they obviously stand for Senior Licensing Officer, Planning and Public Protection, which add me in it. And you will also find till TLL, that's just the Team Leader of Licensing. So we go to page, finished with page 3, on to page 4. Page 5. We'll just go back through them again. We go back through any items on the generator 3 is page 3. Page 4 and page 5. Would someone like to move the meetings? Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 3, which is, agenda item 4, which is the quarterly licensing committee update. And are you doing that, Claire?
Yes, Chair.
You provoke, so I'll hand over to Claire Howells, who will go through the agenda item 4. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay. The purpose of the report this morning is to update the committee on licensing matters for the second quarter of this year, that being the months of July, August and September. It is recommended that the panel note and comment on the contents of the report, that the committee note the activity report for the second quarter, and that the committee note the cumulative activity report for the annual period. Alcohol and entertainment. There have been 15 complaints in relation to licensed premises during this quarter. 2 complaints were in relation to noise nuisance from one premise. The complaints were passed to the Environmental Health Officer for investigation, and as a result, a noise abatement notice was served on the responsible person at the premise. Following this, matters did not improve, and the Environmental Health Officer called for a review of the premises licence. This review actually took place last Thursday, and I can update you now as to the outcome. At the hearing, the premises licence holder voluntarily removed the DPS from the licence, and as a result, all licensable activities and timings that were on that licence remained the same. Conditions were added regarding noise nuisance. This resulted in the premises being closed over last weekend as the premises licence holder voluntarily removed the DPS with immediate effect. I can now update you to say that a new DPS was appointed to that premises on Monday, and that premises is now trading. The licensing officer has investigated 2 other complaints in relation to noise nuisance in conjunction with the Environmental Health Officer. Warning letters to future conduct at the premises have been issued, and to date no further matters have been brought to our attention. There have been 4 complaints in relation to disorder at licensed premises. Warning letters have been served on the licence holders following visits to the premises and discussions. 1 complaint is ongoing, as it is being primarily dealt with by Heathley Gwent Police, but I will be able to update you with further information at the next committee hearing. Other complaints received relate to allegations of premises being open past permitted hours, a DPS withdrawing himself from the licence, and allegations of prostitution and deception in one licensed premises. This matter was passed to the police for information, as is outside of the licensing remit. The licensing officer organised a multi-agency evening operation in partnership with Heathley Gwent Police, Torvine Environmental Health Department and Trading Standards. This took place in September. Underage test purchasing was carried out at 4 licensed, off-licensed premises using plain-clothed underage police cadets. 3 out of the 4 off-licences sold alcohol to the cadets. Any action against the licence holder is in the process of being dealt with by Trading Standards as they take the lead on underage sales. I have put in my report that you would be updated at the next committee meeting, but I can let you know now that formal warnings have been issued and extra training has been provided to these licence holders from Trading Standards.
Thank you, Chairman. To see 3 out of 4 premises, that's 3/4. I dread to think if you went through Torvine doing the same exercise, what the result would be. I know I'm just, saying that on, you can't go by 4, but I find that very, very high.
It is high.
Yes, yeah, and it's when you see these statistics, you realise how important your job is, to send people out. Thank you.
Thank you. As part of the operation, 2 on-licensed... As part of the operation, 2 unlicensed premises were visited and checks were carried out by the relevant officers in relation to licensing, food health and safety and weights and measures. Licensing conditions were checked, food safety checks were carried out, and bottles of spirits and optics were dip tested to ensure their legitimacy. Police cadets were also used to take swabs of various surfaces and rooms at the premises, and those swabs were immediately tested on site to check for evidence of illegal substances using the iron track machine. The only issues detected were concentrations of illegal substances in the toilet cubicle at one premise, highlighting an area of concern for the licence holder. This was in fact in the female toilets, so it's brought to the attention now of that premises that they need to, female staff to undergo regular toilet checks to look for signs of such things happening. There have been 6 premises that have not paid their annual fees by the due date during this quarter. All 6 premises in relation to Licensing Act 2003. 5 premises have paid, but 1 licence remains suspended following non-payment of the fee. The licence holder has emigrated, but the new owners of the premises are aware of the situation and are not selling alcohol. Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing next. There have been 26 taxi-related complaints in this quarter. These include 3 complaints in relation to condition and cleanliness of licensed vehicles, 2 complaints of vehicles not having appropriate signage, and 1 complaint of a driver using foul language when there was a passenger in the car. Words of advice and warning letters have been issued where appropriate. There have been 2 complaints involving unlicensed drivers driving licensed vehicles. 1 driver was issued with a written warning and has since applied and been granted a driving licence. The other is subject to a pending prosecution as referred to in section 5.11 of the report. We are currently dealing with information that we've received in relation to an unlicensed operator. Investigation is underway and the committee will be updated at the next meeting. We also had cause to deal with a complaint whereby a licensed driver made inappropriate comments to a lone female passenger. It was the request of the passenger that the driver was spoken to and advised of his conduct. The driver was spoken to and issued a written warning. He was advised that any future similar complaints may result in a review of his licence to determine if he is a fit and proper person. There is an ongoing investigation into a complaint that a licensed operator has been overcharged a customer. I can update you with regards to this at the moment. The operator has been advised that they should be taking a consistent approach when quoting fares. As this was a private hire operator, we don't have control over the fees that private hire operators charge for private hire vehicles, but advice has been given regarding consistency. The licensing officer is currently dealing with a complaint in conjunction with Blaenau Gwent Licensing Enforcement, following an allegation that one of their drivers has been driving a vehicle whilst under the influence of alcohol. I can't update you at this present time, but you will be updated in due course.
Just one, I appreciate on this particular case that you can comment, and I look forward to the update. However, an allegation of, in general, if there's an allegation that the taxi driver is under the influence, it's an absolute offence. So obviously, with this, to me, the police would have to be involved, and there would be a breath test or a blood test to verify. I'm not sure if it's like pilots of aircraft, they can't drink 24 hours before or whatever, but what are the general rules of taxi driving and alcohol?
This is one that the police were aware of, and other allegations have been made about this driver, but their investigations have not drawn anything together that they would feel they can act on. The police, however, have to deal with things on a criminal basis, which is on, where evidence is on, beyond reasonable doubt, whereas our evidence is on the balance of probabilities, and we have other ways that we can look at things. So that's what's ongoing at the moment.
Thank you. 5.4, child sexual exploitation and taxi licensing. This has been referred to in numerous licensing committee hearings before, so I can update you now that the final session of the safeguarding training took place on the 22nd of July. Many of the drivers who had not undertaken the course sat it on this date, which left only 8 drivers outstanding. To date, 4 of the 8 drivers did not renew their Hackney Carriage private hire driver's licences. 3 have since sat the course, and 1 driver remains suspended as he chose not to sit the course. Gambling, gaming and lotteries. The licensing officer is currently working with colleagues in Blaenau Gwent to assist licence holders to implement local risk assessment policies as required by the Gambling Act of 2005. It became a mandatory condition attached to all gambling premises licences in April of this year that operators have in place local risk assessment policies, taking into consideration the locality around their premises, so schools, public houses, etc. So we're currently working with Blaenau Gwent to assist the licence holders to make sure these are in place. There's been 1 complaint in relation to smoking in a licensed vehicle during this quarter. A licensed driver was seen smoking a cigarette whilst in the vehicle by an environmental health officer. The driver was called into the office and spoken to by the licensing officer and the environmental health officer. She denied that she had been smoking a cigarette and explained that she had been using a faulty electronic type cigarette which had been emitting smoke. She produced an electronic smoking device and stated that she had to buy this new one to replace the faulty old one. On this occasion, a letter of advice was given to the driver, as we could not prove that it was actually a cigarette.
Just one. In general, electronic cigarettes and normal cigarettes are treated on par in the eyes of the law in pubs, etc., etc. They're just not allowed, simply. So it isn't clear from that statement whether her excuse, if she genuinely was smoking an electronic cigarette, would have been overlooked by the licensing if it was genuine, or are you going to treat electronic cigarettes in the future, as any plans, the same as normal cigarettes, whereby they're not allowed in a public place, for instance, in taxi drivers and that?
On this occasion, we obviously had to give her that benefit of doubt. If it was proved beyond reasonable doubt that she had been smoking a real cigarette, she would have been issued with a fixed penalty notice.
Yeah, that's not my question. My question is, in a pub, you cannot smoke electronic cigarettes. It's deemed the same as smoking a normal cigarette. So what you're saying is, if it was an electronic cigarette, taxi drivers can smoke electronic cigarettes, bus drivers can smoke electronic cigarettes. Is that what you're saying? If it is a genuine electronic cigarette?
The law, as it stands, relates to cigarettes, not electronic cigarettes. One of the issues that the Welsh Government had with their public health bill was they were trying to introduce restrictions on electronic cigarettes. And there was a lot of discussion and debate around whether that was a good thing and whether we should restrict electronic cigarettes because they were also seen as being helpful in helping people give up smoking. The difficulty we have as enforcers is if we see a taxi going past with something that looks like a cigarette, how can we tell whether it's a cigarette or an electronic cigarette? I think the only way we could deal with this in taxis is if we changed our taxi policy to prohibit electronic cigarettes as well.
I'm really surprised at that, because I'm sure if taxi drivers who try to give up are smoking electronic cigarettes, the harm of which is still up for debate, is not really clear. I think that you'd be inundated with complaints from passengers if that was allowed and if that was broadcast. I think the issue or the arguments at Welsh Government were public spaces, which might be like in bus shelters and going to that extent, which is in the open air, but as far as a bus shelter is with a normal cigarette, then the the electronic cigarette fraternity thought it would be a step too far in the open air. But in a taxi and in a closed environment, I'm really surprised that that law hasn't come in, or that is not enforced, and it is okay for taxi drivers to smoke electronic cigarettes. I'm quite surprised at that.
As I've said, if I just update then, they were looking to change that legislation. The legislation as it stands relates to enclosed public spaces, which very often, but not always, would include a bus shelter. It has to be enclosed on more than 50% of the walls, which some bus shelters are and some aren't. Pubs certainly would be in terms of smoking cigarettes, and work vehicles are also covered by that legislation. So we can deal with some taxi driver who is smoking a cigarette under that legislation and issue a fixed penalty notice. We also have our policy in relation to taxi driving, which is slightly different. And we could then choose to introduce a restriction on electronic cigarettes, but then that could be quite controversial. In terms of your comments about some pubs have banned electronic cigarettes, and in fact this authority has as well. And we've banned the use of electronic cigarettes on our land. And I think that is partially to do with the fact that we're getting mixed messages in terms of the health benefits versus health risks, but also the difficulties in seeing somebody apparently smoking and then not knowing what they are smoking. So there are all kinds of these of issues that we need to take into account. But at the moment, I think I'd be right in saying that electronic cigarettes in taxis are not prohibited in law, for sure, and not on our policy either.
Yeah. I was going to bring up the same point. I mean, I've been led to believe that electronic type cigarettes emit nicotine. That's the same as smoking. And a taxi is an enclosed place. I wouldn't like to get into a taxi where the driver had been smoking this, and perhaps we should be looking at our policy from now on. Because, I mean, children, are taken into taxis. I mean, nicotine is bad for everyone, but especially for children. I think we should look at the policy.
We will certainly take your comments on board, and I'll pass them over to Simone, who is our lead officer. Thank you. Okay. If we can pick back up at 5.7. There have been no complaints relating to street trading in this quarter, neither have there been any complaints relating to charity collections. There's been one complaint made during this quarter in relation to scrap metal concerning a licensed scrap metal site. Information was received concerning the ownership of the site. An investigation was carried out by the licensing officer, but no licensing issues were found. There have been 15 service requests recorded during this quarter, mainly in relation to giving advice to customers. Prosecutions and appeals. The licensing officer is currently in the process of dealing with a prosecution in relation to an unlicensed driver driving a licensed vehicle. This is being carried out in conjunction with Monmouthshire Licensing Department, as the vehicle is a Monmouthshire licensed private hire vehicle, but the unlicensed driver was witnessed driving in the Torvine area. An update will be provided at the next committee. Delegated decisions. There have been 2 delegated decisions during this quarter. One decision was to revoke a licensed driver's badge on the grounds of medical issues, following information received from the operator that he worked for. And the Chief Officer has also decided to revoke another driver's driving licence following allegations of illegal substance misuse. It was requested by the licensing officer that the driver undertake a drugs test. The driver failed to show up and his licence was revoked. On a third note, the licensing officer is in the process of reviewing a third driver's licence by means of delegated decision, but again an update will have to be provided at the next meeting. 7.1, there's an error here. There have been no licensing panel hearings in this quarter. That should have read there has been one, referring to the review that took place last week, so apologies for that. The team performance plan is attached. and the activity report for the licensing team is attached at Appendix A. There has been an increase in complaints received by the team during the second quarter, so they continue to be very busy and are ensuring that the service provided to the public is of a high standard. The collaboration is continuing to move forward between Blaen y Gwent and Torfaen Licensing Department, and officers continue to work together, carrying out enforcement visits, joint investigations and policy reviews. And your comments regarding the electronic cigarettes will be incorporated into that. So to conclude, the team are dealing with complaints and service requests on a priority basis, as well as a number of delegated decisions and prosecutions. It is recommended that the committee note and comment on the contents of this report, that the committee note the activity report for the second quarter of 2016-17, and the committee note the cumulative activity report for the annual period. Thank you, Chair. That's my report.
Thank you, Claire. Before I go any further, I feel dreadful because I really haven't introduced the people on this top table, which to my immediate right is Tim James, who's dealing with the council, with the legal department, and Justine Case, and of course Karen taking the minutes. I do apologise. I should have introduced those at the beginning, but before we would take any recommendations, I've introduced them, and does anyone have any recommendations? No? Oh, sorry.
Well, only the one we've suggested about this.
If you'd like to move on to the appendix is page 15. 16. Oh,
Can
sorry.
I just, complaints received and investigated, 26 in this quarter, as the report said. Was there any reason for the high number of this quarter, or, you know, was it just a coincidence? I mean, I know you've been through the report, but it was only 15 in the last, 26 in this quarter. That's a lot, isn't it?
I think with regard to licensed premises, alcohol licensed premises, we've just gone through a summer. The weather was kind to us, so we always find that during the summer period, the number of noise nuisance complaints that we get do tend to peak because people are outside and noise travels. But with regard to taxi licensing, I've got no reasons I can provide for that.
Date the next meeting, anything?